Hello and welcome to episode 50 of Graduate Theory. What a fantastic milestone. 50 episodes. It's been a fantastic journey so far. Thanks so much for tuning in. So today's episode is part 2 of this mini series where we are recapping all the episodes that we've done. So just like last episode, in this episode we're looking at episodes 26 to 48. And each of these episodes I asked the guest, what is some advice you'd give yourself if you was finishing university and starting your career today? And this episode is a compilation of responses from right across these episodes. Some of the answers here are really incredible, and it's really cool to be able to compile these in such a nice way. I hope you guys do enjoy this one. If you want to see more, if you want to get involved further, go and subscribe to the Graduate Theory newsletter. For the first link in the description, you'll get an email update whenever something happens. In fact, there's been some interesting developments in the last few days, so I encourage you to subscribe to the email list so you can hear more about that. But without further ado, let's get started. I'd love to kind of wrap on the question that I ask all the guests, and you can take this wherever you'd like, but something I asked the guests is kind of if you had to wind back the clock to when you were just finishing uni and starting into the work world, what things do you know now that you wish you knew when you were at that stage?
Yeah, I think I'd probably experiment a lot more with what for my career. Like, I think what I should have done back then is probably like talk to a lot of people in the ecosystem and figure out like ways to get involved. Even if it didn't seem like I'd be able to get involved from the outside, I should have sort of like been a bit more proactive, I think, and talk to people. Like, I think I was a little bit daunted by the fact that all of the people back then were just like really experienced people, and I was like, oh, who's going to talk? But I think they probably would have been nice enough to talk to me back then, and so like I probably should have done that. I think there's a lot more opportunities for experimentation, and I say this from like a privileged point of view as well. Like, I think some uni students are really privileged in the fact that they still live at home, they don't have to pay rent, they don't have to pay for food, blah blah blah, and so for them, like, they can be pretty, like, they can take more riskier options in their career. So they can work at different startups for like 2-3 month periods, like intern at different places without really worrying about securing a grad job. But other people also, like, who aren't as lucky or in a privileged position, for them what I think is really important is like to be able to sort of like secure a grad job initially, um, secure that grad job, and then use that to leverage other opportunities. And so, like, what I mean by that, and I think this is becoming a bit more accepted now, actually, because companies are really desperate for good talent. And so you're able to sort of like negotiate with them your start date. So like push your grad start date back like 6 months or a year or something like that. And in that time, go and experiment working for a startup, or go and experiment with doing something that you've always wanted to do. If that's traveling all over the world, like, go and do that. If that's sort of like starting your own business, like, go and do that. And you've got a bit of security there in that grad job, and you can always like bring that forward. I'm fairly certain, like, if you just talk to people, like, they're willing to help you out as much as possible. But I think, yeah, like, talking to people, experimenting is probably like what I should have done a lot earlier in my career.
One of the questions I ask all the guests that I have on the show is, and maybe you can take this in a different direction, given your experience with lots of graduates. But the question I ask is, if you had to restart your career and wind the clock back to when you were first starting out, what kind of things would you do differently, or what things would you tell yourself if you were in that environment again?
Yeah, I so know this. And I know this because as a career changer myself multiple times, it can feel really, really overwhelming when you start something, right? Our education system is designed to you go to primary school, high school, university, job, right? And so if you don't follow that pathway, you go, I must have done something wrong, or I haven't succeeded as to the point that I should have, right? And I had that myself. I finished my sport. I then went into nursing and realized that I didn't actually want to do nursing. So what do I do? And you can kind of have a little bit of an identity crisis around that. My advice would be, it is okay to not know what you want to do. It is totally okay. Your life is not over. Your life is just beginning, right? You're just at a fork in a road where you need to choose. So I would say be okay if you don't know. And also, if you go into a role or a company and it doesn't feel right, right? You're not being your best self, don't stay. Honestly, don't stay. If you are giving up 8, 9, sometimes 10 hours of your life to a company, right? You want to enjoy being there. You want to actually go, hey, I'm really excited to get up to work today. I'm excited to, go hang out with my colleagues. And if you don't feel like that, just take a moment to pause and say, why not? Where am I not feeling fulfilled? Right? Is there something about the role? Is there something about the way that their culture is or the work is? And if you don't like it, don't stay. It's too many hours of your life to spend somewhere where you're not getting fulfillment.
I've got one more question for you today, Lacey, and that's around, obviously graduate theory, career kind of focused podcast. And I want to ask yourself, have there been times, or like if you had to restart your career and kind of wind back to when you were first starting out working, is there anything looking back now that you would approach kind of your career progression and perhaps your finances as well? Is there anything there that you would do differently knowing what you know now?
Well, there's one tiny thing in my finances that I didn't understand when I was a graduate. That I know now that I go like, shoot, I should have done something about that. When I was working for Western Mining, BHP took us over. That was in my second year as a graduate, and we had been given options with Western Mining, and I didn't understand what options meant, and so I didn't exercise them. And now I know what options mean. I'm like, it's like that $8,000 I could have had. So when something happens financially at work, when they have like a share plan, or they talk about salary sacrificing or your superannuation matching and stuff like that, if you don't understand, take the time to get the support so you can make a good decision. It's really important that if you get an offer for something from work, that you understand whether it's the right thing for you or not, and that you take the opportunities that you can, because often things like those share plans and those options plans are designed to keep you with the company, but they are a leg up. They are an advantage. But if you just sign without understanding them or ignore them because they're too hard, you can give up a lot. Take the time to learn would be my advice there. The other thing I would encourage people to do, which I hadn't even at the time thought about. Now, you can tell from my discussion that I'm quite a forthright person and I will fight for what's right for me. And something that happened to me when I was in that second year, I was a graduate. I was one of 7 graduates, and 2 of us were female. The other 5 were men. And we were at a site where there was 10 women in total out of 300 employees in Kalgoorlie in Western Australia, right? So that was the reality of going into mining in a remote location back then. It's very different now. The next site I went to was 20% female versus, 10 out of 300. So it's not normal. But what often happens when you're the only woman on a site, or one of the few, is that you get the women's jobs, which for this particular case was my general manager had lost, in the 18 months I'd been there, he'd lost 5 executive assistants. Now that's not normal. Clearly that was a difficult role. But they couldn't find someone, and they really needed someone, so they asked me to fill in. And I had a massive tantrum, like not throwing my fist, but I went into my boss's office and was like, you're just asking me to do this because I'm a woman, and I am not happy about that. There are 5 other graduates who are male. Any of them could do that role. Why did you pick me? Because I had a real bee in my bonnet about this. Like, we always give the women the job of taking the notes, and they always have to get the friggin' tea and all that stuff. Anyway, it was a real thing that I had heard so much about, and I was really sensitive to it. And so I overreacted. But I was really like, it was a fair call. My boss said, that is a fair call for you to say that, because this does happen. And he said, look, I promise you, Lacey, that's not the reason you were chosen for this. Can you just take my word from it that you're going to learn something really important, and that it's you want to take this role? And I was like, okay, fine. I really like the boss. He was fantastic, JP. And I said, all right, fine, I'll do it. But I'm not happy that you picked me because I'm a girl. And he's like, I'm not picking you because you're a girl. Stop it. I'm like, okay, all right, fine. Anyway, so it turns out It was when BHP was looking to buy Western Mining. And I got to be part of the war room that got set up for the merger and acquisition. So I got to be in on the discussions with the executive team and hear how they would pitch the company, how they would persuade another company to buy them. I got to learn about M&A. Now, learning that at 22 is unusual if you're not like in that kind of like for a graduate engineer who just come off the furnace in my scruffy, covered in dirt outfit, to be in these meetings listening to this because I could make graphs and because I could type and they needed that to hear those conversations that were happening, to understand how the war room would get set up, to learn that was like some of the most invaluable experience I got in that graduate program. Like you couldn't have planned it. So my boss had noted that I wanted to be a CEO. He had noted that because I had told him in interviews, like, where do you want to go eventually? I'm like, well, I'd like to be a CEO eventually. So I want to do, management stuff. And he was doing it so that I could get this amazing experience because I was the graduate who had said, I'm interested in that stuff. So he was doing the right thing by me. The fact that I was female, neither here nor there. But if I hadn't listened to him, and I'm just lucky that he didn't go, well, fine, I'll give it to someone else, just to spite me. Someone else, I'm very lucky that he was understanding and saw my response. So that's the difference between having a good boss and a bad boss. So what did I learn out of that? Sometimes you'll think it's because of something that it's not. I had a real bee in my bonnet. Everything I looked at, I was like, they're asking me to do that because I'm a girl. I'm refusing on principle because I'm a feminist and thou shalt not make me. It's not always the same. It's just that's your frame of reference. Okay, so you need to be willing to listen when people tell you that's wrong. Sometimes you'll be right. Sometimes you won't be. That's, I think, the most important thing out of that. The second thing that I learned out of this experience is something that's carried me through my whole career is pick your boss wisely. There is no one who will have a bigger impact on how happy you are at work than your boss. The end. 80% of your satisfaction at work, I reckon, comes from whether you have a good boss or a not so good boss. Now, you have to have had not so good bosses to be able to understand what a good boss is, I think. And I've had only a couple in my time. I've been very lucky. I've had fantastic bosses, but I started to get very choosy very early on about who I'd work for that reason. I think there were times when I was younger when I worked for I'm going to be blunt, a bad boss. He was shocking. Should not have been allowed to manage people, just cookie cutter for everything. No taking into account anyone's personal views, circumstances, or preferences. Just know this is how we do it. You will do it this way. Oh, we never give people that high mark. You only ever everybody gets an average. Like that. He should not be allowed to manage people. Recognizing that that's not you necessarily. It's not your fault. I had a lot of that. It's sort of like, because when you're new in the workplace, you don't really understand whether that's because you're not meeting expectations or whether you've just been lumped with a bad boss. Sometimes it's a little bit of both. So you got to be honest with yourself. But if you've got a bad boss, just accept that that's a bad boss and they're not right for you. Maybe they're good for other people, but not right for you, and become choosy. So that's, I think, something that I learned based on my youth experience. I've got to be really picky about who I work for, and don't work for assholes. The end.
I've got one last question for you, Yaniv, and that's a question I ask all the guests on the show. And it's the question is this: if you had to rewind the clock back to when you were first starting work, knowing what you know now, is there anything, any advice you'd give yourself, or anything that you'd do differently in that situation?
Yeah, I think I'd back myself more and be more entrepreneurial. And I suspect there's a generational element to this, where you go from a couple of generations back where it was kind of a lifetime employment sort of thing, maybe to my generation where there's a lot more mobility in people's careers, but it still tended to follow a path of full-time jobs, from one to another. To I think now when I'm seeing a lot of the sorts of communities like the one that you're serving, right, where people are really trying to be the architects of their own careers. So when I say entrepreneurialism, sure, some of the time that means starting your own business, or it might mean starting a side hustle or a podcast or anything like that, and building a personal brand. But it also means taking a more active control of your career and not being as passive and say, well, I've got my job now, I need to work towards my next promotion or whatnot. It's really a question of being, the architect of your own career, and understanding, of course, that the future is very difficult to predict, but to have a set of goals and principles that you proactively set, and then try to design your career around that. I think I'm seeing a lot more of that with the current generation of graduates and early career folks, and I'm really kind of in awe of that and a bit envious of that. And I sort of think, if I'd been more intentional in designing my career, where could I have gotten to, or could I have gotten to where I have earlier? So that's something that I feel that's the advice I would have to myself is, be intentional in planning a career. The tools that are available these days are incredible, right? Just from things like this podcast to communities like Early Work, through to just the vast amount of resources online, the ability to start side hustles fairly easily, the availability of capital for early stage startups. That there is a lot of stuff around now that didn't used to exist, and I think if I were around now, I would hope that I'd be able to make more use of that stuff and really, be intentional and mindful in designing my career.
A question that I ask all the guests that I have on the show is, if you could rewind the clock, if you could go back to the days where you just finished university and you were going out into the world, knowing what you know now and knowing that, all the advice that you've written, what are some things that you would do differently, or what is some advice that you would give yourself if you were back in your shoes, in that situation?
It's funny, James, right? I think, I don't know if I shared this with you, but my career was very different. I started off owning rock and roll clubs in New York, right? I owned 2 rock and roll clubs that only booked original music and had bands like the Ramones and the Stray Cats and Joan Jett and Bo Diddley and Richie Havens. I left that business because the first one was extremely successful. The second one was a failure. And my wife would only marry me if I got out of that business. But then I went into corporate America. And in corporate America, I was with a division of a Fortune 100 firm, an international Fortune 100 firm, Alcatel, a French company. And in 7 years, I was promoted 5 times. I went from a sales rep to a sales manager to a general manager to a district manager. My last job was heading up all East Coast operations with over 1,000 people reporting to me. I left that job, and I was making a heck of a lot of money for one reason and one reason only. I was never home at night. I was traveling a great deal, and we had a young family, and I was looking to have some work-life balance. I went into executive search, James, because I had used search firms myself. I knew I could bring some value to it, but I never knew what I would find. I did it because I could be home at night. Now, it went on to be extremely successful very fast. But what I'm going to tell your audience, what I would do differently, I found purpose in executive search. So even though when my firm became one of the largest retained search firms in the world, I never stopped leading the searches because I got purpose talking to the executives, talking to the clients, and putting a good match together. Half of the people that I would place in these C-level jobs had to pick up their families from one city and move them to another city for the role. And I felt that if I'm going to pick this person's family up and move them, I have to make sure that this is a good match. And I found purpose in that. I had passion. I was excited. I woke up in the morning and I couldn't wait to go to work and do what I did. So if I had to go back, I think I would have tried to identify early on where that passion was and that purpose, and might have been a little bit more strategic in looking for it. I got very, very lucky and fortunate. So many other people do not. Now, it went on. The other thing is, this book that I wrote, every financial reward that comes to me is going to be donated directly to the charity my wife and I started, the Plant a Seed, Inspire a Dream Foundation, to help more kids pursue their passions. So I'm a big believer. Pursue your passions. Find purpose in your life. If you can find that and you can make a career figuring out how to pursue those things. You're going to be healthier, you're going to be happier, you're going to smile more. And that's the message I want to leave your audience with.
So I've got one question left for you, and that is, it's a question I ask all the guests that come on the show, and it is, if you were looking at the Robby that's just finished university and is about to sort of go out into the world and tackle his job, what advice would you give him, sort of knowing what you know now and all the experiences that you've had?
So easy. I would just say read and run every day. Like if you if you read books every day and run every day, I guarantee you, like, your life will change forever. Like if you just do those two things, even if you start at like a kilometer and a page, they're just those two things are so unique uh, in their capacity. And I'll be very brief on this. Like, reading allows you to get mentors and knowledge and understanding, and you sort of level up your education and whatever. Um, Running's cool because running gets you outside. Getting outside every single day is really, really important for like your circadian rhythm and just your mental well-being. When you run and you run through space and your eyes move, it relaxes you and it makes you incredibly calm. And then also, when you do like cardiovascular exercise, it can actually form like you get like neurogenesis in your hippocampus and allows you to have like a fluffy hippocampus, which increases and improves your memory. So if you're running every day, your memory is going to be better. If your memory is better, you're going to be learning more. If you're learning more, you're going to be fit and educated. It's pretty hard to go. It's pretty hard for your life to go south if you just focus on those two things. I think everyone can give you all these like weird anecdotes and statements and all those kind of things, but practically, like, try to read and run at least once a day, and I think your life will just transform from there. You learn what you need to do next just by doing those two things.
I've got one more question for you, Cheran, and that is a question I ask all the guests that come on the show, and it is, if you could kind of let's even for yourself go back to when you were first starting university and kind of out into this journey of discovering, the different opportunities that are awaiting you, and what advice would you give to someone that's perhaps now just starting out on their journey?
Yeah, totally. I think a few things. I'll probably say three things. Have to keep it very structured as a future consultant. I think the first one would be do things your own way. I've mentioned the phrase hedonic treadmill a few times now, but it's very easy, and I know that I am a person who subjects this on others. Is you see the LinkedIn's of people, and you say, "Oh, well, you know, by doing this he got to this, and by doing B he got to C," and um, have a consciousness that there are a million ways to get to where you want to be, and be driven enough that you pursue goals. And if you are pursuing roles and titles and whatever it is, that's fine, but don't be so driven that you forget to, as they say, smell the roses on the way, and you forget about the reason why you've done that journey. And I'm not ending up in banking, but I'm still glad I've spent 1.5 years in banking, because that's taught me a whole skill set of things that if I was so focused on the outcome, I would think that was a waste, which it certainly isn't. So I'd say firstly, do things your own way. Second thing, nobody cares. And that sounds rather flippant. But what I mean by that is genuinely nobody cares about so many of the failures that we have on a daily basis. I remember seeing this visualization once on Twitter. And if you imagine two concentric circles, and you sort of have one circle and then you have a little small circle in the middle of it, and that small circle is how much other people think about you, and all the space around it is how much you think about other people thinking about you. And that's just the reality that literally nobody cares. Everyone has their own issues and problems to sort through. And it's very liberating once you realize that, because all of a sudden you're just focused on your own happiness and your personal pursuit of your goals. And that's all you need in life. I think life is already tough enough without worrying about what other people think, or what's going to be the impact of me not getting X or not being at this stage in life. And especially when you surround yourself in a high academic achieving background of students and cohorts, as the universities you and I have been to, it gets very easy to fall into that mental trap. And then the last thing I'd say is that life will generally be okay. And I think this sort of links back to nobody cares. But I've said this a lot to, it's graduate season at the moment. A lot of students in the years below, some students that I tutor at university have been really stressed and worried about applications. And I think remember that everybody peaks at a certain period of time, and that's not going to be 22 for everybody. And it would be rather sad if you're peaking at 22. So I think just remember that the vast majority of your listeners and the people who are part of this community have lived in a time which has never been better than time before, number one. And that's secondly, generally everybody, if you work hard enough, if you don't let luck impact everything in your life, you will be okay. And you will get to where you want to eventually, and that there's no rush in life in terms of reaching certain goals. And just because it seems like the vast majority of people reach goals within a certain period of time, doesn't mean that you have to be part of that as well. Because there are countless numbers of people, Reid Hoffman is a prime example, who reached, their peak successes and their first successes in their 40s and 50s. So that would be my three pieces of advice. Do things your own way. Nobody cares, and it'll all be okay, James. It'll all be okay.
I've got like one last question for you, and and that is like, so you're in university currently. Let's rewind perhaps back to the start of uni and thinking about who Max was at that stage. Knowing what you know now and all the things that you've done, all the experiences that you've had, if you could go back to Max, who's just starting, well, he's just left school, let's say, what advice would you give to yourself?
Be more courageous, take more risks, break the rules. University equals internships. In other words, like you use the time to do internships, and then like again, be even more courageous. So that's the advice I'd go back and give myself.
Amazing. Yeah, the courage idea is really interesting one, and certainly I think I can be better. I think many of us can be better at applying that one.
Yeah, man. I think I'm still like, I actually still think it's a weakness of mine. I still think I don't take enough risk. I still think I can up courage, and it's iterative, right? Like the more you put yourself out there, the more courage, the more things you do that are courageous. The more you build up like thick skin to it. It no longer feels like being courageous; it just feels like the normal, right? And that's why, again, going back, I love Next Chapter, because being around people in there makes things that used to be courageous just normal, right? You just continue to like raise the bar on what's normal, and that as humans, I think, winding up with that independence of thought idea, our innate state is to copy others. If you put two babies in a room with 1,000 toys, they will fight over one toy. So our innate state is to copy others. Given that piece of information, I want to be around others or in a community where if I copy others, I end up in a really, really damn good place. I think that's true of courage as well. If you're around people who up the bar on ambition and courage and proactivity, even starting a podcast like what you're doing, right? Like a third of the community bloody run podcast or something like that. It's courageous. It's like, it's a bold move. You put yourself out into the world. So I'd say that as well. Like as a closing piece of advice, be really deliberate about like trying to find people who lift you up and trying to be part of communities or collectives of people that create a culture where exceptional is normal.
I've got like one more question here for you, Juliana,
Okay,
and that is around a lot of the audience listening is kind of grads or early career people looking to sort of start their career and start it off in the right manner. And I'd love to ask, thinking about yourself and your journey, if you could kind of wind back the clock to when you first graduated uni and went out into the world of work, knowing what you know now and all the things you teach, what would you go back and is there any advice you'd give yourself if you're in that stage now?
Okay, if I'm in that stage now. So going back to my first point, look for someone that will guide you, that will give you a full picture, because it's so much easier when you know where you're going. And I'm saying this because I've gone through that process myself here in Australia. I've tried, a couple of times to get into the market with the knowledge that I had back in the days. I was 23, 24 years old, and I wasn't getting anywhere. Once I hired someone and I said, look, this is where I come from. This is the experience I have so far. This is where I want to go, and this is what I would like to achieve. How can I prepare to actually face the challenge and actually getting there? Okay, so we're going to have to work on CV, cover letter, LinkedIn. We're going to have to work on a mock interview. What's your interview style? Interview is one of the crucial points here, right? Because the majority of the people think, oh, do you have a questionnaire that I can have a look? Or do you have a video on YouTube? Look, not really, because the worst thing you can do in an interview process is decorating answer and question and answer, question and answer. Because when you're in an interview, obviously you will know more or less what they're going to be asking you, but more than that, you need to build your thought process. You need to learn how to build your thought process, because if the interviewer asks you something that is outside of your preparation, let's say, you're going to go blind. You're going to go, oh, and then you just answer whatever. And after all the excitement, went down, you just go, I shouldn't have answered that. Oh, I didn't prepare for that. Oh, that question that I decorated wasn't asked. So it is not about decorating. It's about you learning how to create credibility through, your thought process. How do you build that thought process? How do you tell your story? So that comes on the mentorship as well, right? So if you know what you're doing, good on you. Get yourself ready, go for it. All the best luck. If you don't know, or if you're in doubt, search for a professional, search for someone that will, clear the road for you so you can drive through and get to your final destination.
Yeah, perfect. Someone that is, let's say, they've finished high school and they're starting their journey out in the big wide world. Thinking and reflecting on your own journey, what advice would you give to someone that's going through that right now?
The first thing that comes to mind is be emotional, which is kind of strange. But when I was younger, I thought it was bad to be like passionate in a way. I thought that, young people kind of get this bad rap of being like too angry and too fired up, or, or the opposite. They don't care enough. I think it's really important to not worry about perfection when you're young, because it's just impossible to achieve, and just feel things and act like impulsively somewhat, and really appreciate the good and the bad that comes with being a young person. That you have to go through all of that. Like, it's all really positive thing. So that would be my first piece of advice. And secondly, to be bold. Again, that idea of how far are you willing to go alone? Absolutely don't let anybody else define the path that's in front of you if you don't want to. And you might, have a family or parents and who want a certain thing for you and think that's what is best for you. And you might agree with some of those things, that's totally fine. But the key there is being able to ask yourself, why am I doing this? Like, what's really driving this goal or this step for me? Am I just going to university because I think I have to go to university, or am I going because it's actually the most purposeful step for me? So ask yourself why, and really try and think about that when you're making choices, and do your best to make those decisions in alignment with like who you are, not the rest of the world around you. Because honestly, at the end of the day, who cares what they think? You have to live. You have to live with it. They don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be
one more question for you, Elaha, and that is a question I ask all the guests on the show, and that is, if you could think back to when you were finishing uni and perhaps in your last year of uni, kind of about to go out into the world and do these things where you're trying to get a job at XY place, knowing what you know now and all the things that you've done, what advice would you give yourself if you were at that stage again?
Yeah, I would say be bold, take risk, and don't be afraid of the unknown paths. I think for so long, growing up, even with the society that we're in, it tells you to take this linear, safe path. It kind of lays down this path of like, if you do X and Y, then you will get Z. And that's how you'll be successful. And for so long, like management consulting or even like other roles, I was kind of chasing the paths that were laid out to me because I was kind of afraid of taking risk. I was afraid of the unknown paths. Because if you do take unknown paths, like let's say startup or entrepreneurship, like you don't know what lies ahead in 5-10 years. It's kind of unknown and very risky. So if I were to look back and look at my younger self going through kind of graduate or university, I would say take risk and don't be afraid of the unknown. Because once you do explore the unknown paths where the path isn't laid out to you, but you enjoy it, you're curious about it, you will meet the most interesting people. You will be challenged and grow so much. And the things that you always wanted, the people, the tribe, the passion, the things that you always crave for, it will come to you through those unknown paths. That's where the magic lies. That's where the growth lies. So that's what I would tell my younger self.
If you could sort of go back to Gigi's, probably in his last year of uni, he's about to go out into the world. Now that you've sort of experienced all this stuff, what is some advice that you'd go back and give yourself if you were in that situation again?
It's hard to say. If that was a serious proposition, like, okay, you can go back in time and tell the young Gigi something, I would probably actually would pass on the opportunity. And I say that because you run the risk of saying something that over the 10 years or 15 years, even when I was uni, that gets misinterpreted. And perhaps you end up chasing this thing because, this future me came from the future just to tell me this one thing. So this one thing might be super important, and you might really misinterpret it. Whatever the advice is, right? I can say, oh, everything's gonna be all right. Don't worry, for instance, and then perhaps the young Gigi takes it too literally and doesn't do anything with his life, and then change the course. Or you can say something like, like work harder or whatever it is, and then you just go to the wrong tangent as well. So I'll probably just pass on the opportunity.
Yeah. No, fair enough. Yeah, you don't want to. I feel like that's nice because I guess it reflects like where you are now is going super well for you, and you're really enjoying like where your life is at the moment. So important not to don't want to mess that up by accident, for sure. Well, yeah. What would some advice be that you'd give like just people generally? Maybe it's university students in Australia that are kind of coming to the end and trying to work out what they want to do with their lives. Is there any advice that you'd give those people?
I'll probably say that your lives are not going to be decided then. Like, I think at that stage, many people think I'm making these big life decisions now, but in the big scheme of things, that's a commitment. Whatever you're doing, that's probably a couple years commitment, if that much. And there's so much more in your life, in your career. So don't worry too much over overthinking these kind of things. And there's always a way to course correct later if you're not enjoying it.
I've got one last question for you, Caleb. And this is a question that I ask all the guests. And it is, if you were graduating or perhaps quitting university early again, like this time, like again now, right? What advice would you give someone that's kind of at that stage in their life?
Yeah. Yeah, I think the main thing is just like take it easy. You have so much time ahead of you. Like your 20s are like you're made to screw up. Like you're supposed to screw up as many times as you want in your 20s. And it's cool, like, because you probably, like, I don't know, I think here is like there's quite a lot of safety, right? Like if everything goes wrong, you can probably get a job somewhere, or like you might have a support network to help you out. So don't worry too much if things don't go well in your 20s. Like it's meant to be kind of shit and also like really fun. And I'm definitely experiencing that now where it's like, why don't I have my shit together in like some aspects of my life? I'm like, it's cool. So yeah, I think it's just like have fun, have as much fun as you can, and just do things that you enjoy. And just say yes to as much things as you can that like are helpful for you.
I've got one more question for you, Lisa, and that is around, careers and young people more generally. It's a question I ask all the guests that come on the show, and that is, if you could, like, if someone was kind of graduating university again, heading out into the world, and you had the chance to give them some advice, knowing the things that you know now and the things that you've been through, what is some advice that you would give someone at that stage?
Never listen to someone who gives you advice without asking some questions first, is my piece of advice. Isn't that a head spin? Yes.
Yeah.
The other one is, don't put too much pressure on yourself. I think you find the right pathway, James, whatever road you take at the fork at that time. And I feel like, there's a lot of pressure, make the right decision. Like, it kind of all comes out in the wash at the end of the day. And remember that if you make a misstep, so if you accept a position that you absolutely hate, then tick, well done, you've just learned something about what you don't want next time. Right?
Yeah.
So take the pressure off. You're okay. If every day is lab day, you're fine. So that's one thing as well.
I've got one more question for you, Brendan, and that's a question I ask all the guests that come on the show, and that is advice for young people that have just graduated university, perhaps young engineers in this case. Like, what advice would you give someone that's fresh out of university and wants to become a great engineer?
Wow. Okay. Well, look, I think it's definitely the case that you want to find mature engineering orgs to join where you can learn from exceptional individuals. So you want to find the engineering cultures in the mature engineering teams where you've got these mentors, informal or otherwise, that can teach you the art of software engineering, and you can learn from. So, we certainly deliberately set out to create a culture like that at Canva. But like a lot of the big companies like Google, Amazon, Microsoft, Apple, they will all have that, and I think that's something to definitely aim for. I think that there is a risk for grads in. And I'm not saying don't do it, but I think there's just some risks in maybe joining smaller outfits where you can very quickly be the most knowledgeable and experienced person in the room, and that can be dangerous if you're just fresh out of uni. So it can work. It's just a risk. I personally think that it's better to join somewhere where you've got those mentors that help you see what great looks like and can help you get there.
I've got a last question for you, Mykel. It's something that I ask all the guests, and graduate theory. It's sort of we're about young people that are sort of perhaps around my age, early career, perhaps at university. I wonder if there's any advice that you would hand to people that are at this stage, kind of looking to grow their career and ideally be in the sort of 2% that are still the creative genius when they're a bit older.
You can't let the world get to you. You are going to be met with, I hope it's changing. I really do. I think it is. I think it's changing, but probably still the next maybe 10 years might be a bit bumpy. We're trying to figure it out. You are going to have people that are mean. You're going to have people that talk about you behind your back. You're going to have people that actively try to, withhold information from you or stunt your career or do all these kind of things. Don't let them stop you. Like you've got to trust yourself, love yourself. You've got to accept that you came here for a reason, and it's not better or smaller or grander or lesser than anyone else's. If you're here, you're meant to be here, and you have a voice and you have something you're supposed to contribute to this planet. And that could be your neighbors, that could be your family, that could be, the colleagues, customers, whatever. You could be another Steve Jobs. You could be another Barry who lives in the suburbs, who's just a radical dude who says g'day to the postie every day. It doesn't matter. You're here for a reason. And you just cannot let the world
diminish you and make you feel less than how much of a miracle you are. And this might sound like a little bit, Tony Robbins motivational speaking, but we need that right now. We've been told we're not enough. We've been told that we're not going to make it, that we aren't this, that we're not as good as them, that we're nah. You open up Instagram, it's just everyone's better than you, skinnier than you, got more money than you, blah, 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 blah. It's horrible. And it's all bullshit because all those people are worried and terrified and, insecure and rah. You've just, like, my advice would be find people that you can trust and rely on and just hold this little unit of kind of safety and sacredness where you value each other, you support one another, you remind each other, hey, we're awesome. Because the next world, the world that you'll all be building, it's going to be better than the one that I inherited. And the one I inherited was better than the one my parents did. And the one that, we're getting better. We're on this journey. Mm-hmm. But it can knock you around, man. It can knock you around. And it's whether people mean to or not, whatever. Everyone that's listening to this right now, and you included, James, are extraordinary. You've got just so many beautiful, astonishing things to give to this world. We don't even know what they are yet. That's the magic of it. It's like, wow, who knows what James is going to do in 5 years' time or 10 years or 20 years. But if you start to believe a little story in your head that maybe James doesn't have something special to give, then you're not going to launch that next project. And then we don't get the benefit of that. And this is the same as true, which I try to tell as many people as possible when I'm doing a keynote or a session, a leadership program, et cetera, et cetera. Look, guys, I really encourage you to share generously because I can talk at you for 2 hours, 3 weeks, 9 months. I can blah, 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 blah. Hey, I hope that you get some value from that. Let's hope that there's a little bit of insight in there. But the real value is going to come from you all sharing your story, your experience, your perspective, how you see and perceive the world. You have no idea that the question you ask or the story you share or the insight that that came to you, that could be the thing that unlocks something for someone else. And the whole reason they came to this event or this keynote or this program or whatever was to hear you say that thing, not to hear me say it. It's to you. And so if you don't lean in, if you don't share, because you don't think, my question's not good enough, or I'm not as talented as the others, or then you're robbing that person of having what they need. Do you know what I mean? Like you're stopping them from getting the magic that they need to set their life on fire. We're all connected. And it's so insidious and it's so terrifying when we start to believe that we're not enough or that we don't have something amazing to contribute. And that amazing thing to contribute could literally be, hey, I'm not sure I understand what's going on. You put your hand up and ask that question. Fantastic. There's probably 17 other people that are thinking that, but are too afraid to ask it. And you've just got, oh, God, thanks so much for asking that. That was awesome, amazing. This is what we want, a world like that. And where we're just generous and we're in it together and we're all being ourselves and sharing ourselves as much as possible. And that kind of place, man, that's the world I want to live in. And it's coming. So hang in there, team. I'm with you. You know what I mean? We're in this together.
The question for you is, I ask all the guests that come on the show this, and we've got Graduate Theory aimed at sort of uni students, early professionals. I wonder for yourself, looking back to who you were in the early years of your career and thinking what you were like at that stage, is there any advice that you would give the Dave Lourdes that that was sort of just starting out in his career, or is there any advice you'd give young people sort of starting their career today?
Yeah, have you got any time for another podcast? Because mate, my whole career and life has been a movie, a series of mistakes. So I'll tell you some of the ones I look back on that I wish I changed. I'm only grappling because I have so many. So thinking you shouldn't speak up or participate because you're too young or don't know enough, or it's not your area of expertise. I think one of the most important things that I wish I did earlier and more often was scaling gratitude and empathy. I don't think you can ever say thank you enough, and also caring about people. I would say I was overly goal-oriented when I started, and wanted to, was driven by ego to work on the big projects and feel good about myself for working these ridiculous hours. That was working hard, not smart. But having more of that empathy and understanding that everyone's different, being more grateful, having an unhealthy ego, sometimes asking, I wouldn't ask questions because I go, oh, will that make me look stupid? If we all did that, no one would ask any questions, right? And so I think asking questions early on, a little one actually is attend work events. Like not attending work events, I think is a CLM, not attending work events. A CLM is a career limiting move. You're part of the team and, it's no different to social events. Sometimes, you can't be bothered or you're tired or whatever it may be. I think it's important to make the time to do that. I would have focused earlier and faster. Now I'm a manic. I love building relationships with people. I'm obsessed in that. And I did that in my career as well, but I would have started that earlier. Building genuine relationships. And I'm a big believer in if you don't schedule something, it won't happen. So in this example, if you say I'm going to read more, unless you do it at a certain time, I'm a big believer in it won't happen. Or if someone says I'm going to exercise. So I know for me, my exercise time Monday to Friday is 4:30 a.m. and on Saturdays is 6:30 a.m. I sleep in a little bit, and on Sunday I have a rest. So actually scheduling stuff. I think one of the most powerful things you can say to people that I wouldn't say back then, that I wish I started saying earlier, is I don't know. Instead of pretending I know or thinking I know and then having to go away and research it or something like that. I think that's an important one. Expect to get stuck. You just expect that it's going to happen. It's going to happen. It happens to all of us. It happens to us now. I would have asked for help earlier and faster. It's something that I definitely didn't do. And also I'm going to say, don't take a local issue and globalize it. And what I mean by that is when you're being stuck is temporary, but it's a stain. It's not a tattoo. And by the way, I wish I knew all this back then. The other one that I learned actually from having a personal trainer, I don't know if you've ever had a personal trainer. That's an industry you want to get into, because a personal trainer, when you think you're dead, they go 5 more and you hate them and you swear under your breath, at least I do, and then you give them money and come back next week. But the personal trainer mindset in my mind is they always say, come on, just one more, just one more. And when I first got a personal trainer, I remember his name was Mykel, that really stuck with me about going, yeah. So whenever I think that I've reached my limit, is just one more, just one more. And that's helped me a lot. And if I could only pick one thing, James, it would be self-awareness is king. I've already talked about emotional intelligence, and within that they talk about 4 or 5 different markers of emotional intelligence. And for me, self-awareness is the beast. That's the one. If you can master that, you'll master your life. Knowing what excites you, knowing what deflates you, knowing what throws you off track, knowing what gets you back on track, knowing how you respond when you're confronted and your confidence goes down. So self-awareness, if I could only pick one out of all those, that was the one I wish I learned earlier, for sure. And I wish I got a coach earlier too. You better stop me, because I'll bring more wishes up.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Graduate Theory. Like I said at the start, if you do want to get involved further, go and subscribe to the Graduate Theory newsletter, where you get an email from me every single week with a new episode. Thanks again for sticking all the way through, and we'll see you again next week.